Okay, back to our story of Eastern absolutism. Now, in part two of this experience, I want to highlight some of the points regarding the emergence of both Austria and of Brandenburg-Prussia. Okay, let me start with Austria. And the first thing to know is that Austria is not a homogeneous state. Never has been, probably never will be. When it begins to emerge as a nation state under the Habsburgs, you see a large number of ethnic groups living in what we know as Austria. For instance, you had Germans, you had Hungarians, you had Czechoslovakians, you had Croats, you had Serbs, all united under the Habsburg Empire. So it's not one state, but Austria at that point was basically a collection of states. And with a collection of states, it's hard to develop one bureaucracy, it's hard to develop one manner of doing business, which for the Habsburgs, the ruling family of Austria, means that they're going to have less ruling authority than what one might believe about a king, about an emperor, about a ruler of any kind. The Habsburg power is going to be very weak and will remain so for 4 centuries until the time the Habsburgs dissolve and Austria-Hungary dissolves as an aftermath of World War I. The Habsburgs are going to be struggling. They're always going to be, in a sense, fighting for their own survival. Okay? But there are 2 things that you can see with the Habsburgs. One, they want a fiercely Catholic state in Central Europe. And they're going to do everything they can to maintain that Catholicism. Their goal is to stamp out any other form of religious viewpoint that is in evidence throughout Europe. That is a major concern. The second piece is that the Habsburgs become very good at soliciting help from others. They will get help from the Ottomans at times. They will get help from Western Europe at times. Okay, when Spain weakens, and during the wars of the Spanish Succession, for instance, the Habsburgs are going to get help from the Ottomans and from other outside forces that basically allow them to win the War of the Spanish Succession. And at the Peace of Utrecht in 1713, Austria is going to gain much of what had been Spanish territory in Central Europe, and it's going to allow them to finally develop a large empire. Large, however, does not necessarily mean successful and does not mean prosperous by any means. The Habsburgs are always going to have money issues. The Habsburgs are always going to have religious and ethnic issues inside their state. And basically their empire becomes a kind of confederation, kind of a bringing together of weak states. Does it ring a bell? Does it ring a bell to, say, the Northern Netherlands in the same time period? The only difference is that in the Northern Netherlands, you had other groups, you had several different ruling groups. In Austria, however, you have just one, the Habsburgs. But the Habsburgs are kind of juggling balls. They have to be mindful of the various ethnic groups under their control. And it's hard to develop one set of laws and one set of customs when you're dealing with all of these varied groups. So if you look at Austria, Austria is kind of going to take a back seat to the other 2 major powers that emerge in Central Europe. Those being Brandenburg-Prussia, what we now know as Germany, and Russia, which emerges as a far different power under Peter the Great. What I want to do with the rest of this is take a short look at Brandenburg-Prussia, and then I'm going to give you a larger piece in another video that will deal with the emergence of Russia. Okay, now to talk about the Prussians. Prussians start out in Brandenburg, a relatively small state in what we now know as Germany, under the rule of a family that we will know as the Hohenzollerns. The Hohenzollerns, just like the Habsburgs that we just talked about, are going to be in power in Central Europe up to the end of World War I, when their empire and German rule under Hohenzollern dynasty ends with the crumbling of the Kaiser at the end of the First World War. Okay, starts out as Brandenburg, 14th, 15th century. In the middle of the 16th century, it will add land that we called East Prussia, and hence the name Brandenburg-Prussia. Now, Brandenburg-Prussia will become an absolutist state under the rule of the Elector Frederick William, who rules Brandenburg-Prussia from 1640 to 1688. Frederick William accepts many of the ideas of the French model. As a for instance, he develops the ability to collect taxes by military force. He builds an army that's strong enough to enforce his will without the power of the nobles. That's going to lead to an interesting situation. The nobility in Brandenburg-Prussia are going to be called the Junkers. And Frederick William makes a deal with the Junkers, and that deal looks something like this. The Junkers agree that they're going to provide absolute loyalty to the Hohenzollern family. They will pay the taxes, they will do what's necessary, they will help raise the army, they will basically ensure that the Hohenzollern family remains in power. In exchange, the Hohenzollern family agrees that the Junkers will have almost complete obedience over their serfs. They will have complete rule over those peasants who are tied to the land. In other words, the emperor won't have anything to do with them. They're left at the power and the behest of the individual landed noble. So if I'm your noble and you do wrong in my account, you deal exclusively with me, not with the king, not with any other group. You are going to face my wrath and have to deal with the circumstances that come to play. In some cases, the Junkers are able to avoid taxation. They are going to become the officer corps for Frederick William's army and eventually the Prussian army. And they're going to take loyalty oaths to the king, to the elector. That is going to set the stage for Brandenburg-Prussia to become the military power of Central Europe. And you'll see that military power exert itself over and over again. First as Brandenburg-Prussia, later as Prussia itself, then again later on as Germany. So this military might really has its beginnings in the absolutist state of Frederick William. All right, so there now are the Austrian and the Brandenburg-Prussia models. I'll be back in part 3 of this to take a further look at Russia.